Hello and welcome to the Space Between Ideas. I'm Blaine Gates. And let's begin. So today I wanted to just kind of continue. So you know that our overall endeavor that we're working toward is to create an online course which gives people the opportunity to manage analysts, decision makers, functional and cross-functional managers. And this is more at the project level. So this is the decision level. Now it could be at the endeavor level, just making decisions about the larger endeavors, or it could be at a smaller practical project level and structuring those deliverables. Now, one way of talking about structuring deliverables is this idea of objectives and key results. So when you deliver the key results, then you know that you can reach those objectives. Now, specifically in the decision-making process, we have to understand data, we have to analyze the past, and then we have to make decisions about and for the future. So we have a couple of checklists that help us to think about those things. Now, today I wanted just to kind of do a little basic, let's start from the top, and then pull the decision-making process down to a decision-making level. Now, today I was talking to one student, and we were talking about, I asked, what are the, what would you term an endeavor? Like, what are the pieces, parts, what are the elements of an endeavor? And it was interesting to listen to his ideas because he basically gave the same answer as what you can find in Tom's book. So in Tom's book, he has something called endeavor elements. And the question is, what is an endeavor? This is probably one of the biggest questions that people ask me about, and they're just like, endeavor, what's an endeavor? You know, when people say you should be anxiously engaged in worthwhile endeavors. All right, so these are the directions that you're going. These are the major purposes. These are your major goals. Projects are smaller. Also, the definition of a project, it has something like a beginning, a middle, and an end. And an endeavor, it doesn't necessarily have to be that small. It can be much larger, the business in general, and the results that you're trying to achieve in society. There's a lot of things that go into this larger concept of an endeavor. But number one is that all endeavors will create some kind of effect. Number two, in order to create that effect, you're going to have to form some kind of agenda. You have to have some kind of plan. And number three, that plan is going to be based on using potential. And when you create those effects, it actually will shape the potential. So it's a process of shaping potential within the scope of a plan in order to achieve some kind of result. Now, you can see why endeavor is such a difficult thing to conceptualize, because these are really, really big ideas, creating effects. Well, what does that mean? Well, you know, as you can see in the last couple of videos, I'm trying to list categories of what it means to create effects. So, and then the online course that we're trying to create right now is focused on forming agendas. And of course, we're also going to need to talk about potential, because that's what you use to form agendas. All right, so that's the foundation of the book, and that's the foundation of also what I teach. So now, in general, I would say that, so we do start with, to some extent, we start with the state progress checklist. But I like to start with the state synergies checklist because I want to get an idea of what people want to talk about. Now, in general, we can talk about the range of services. We can talk about product features of your company. And then the idea of expanding, it means changing over time. And then we have current and new customers. All right, so this is quite a big topic because we're talking about research and development, we're talking about anticipating customer needs, we're talking about sales, we're talking about possibly marketing, well, if we want. So this is like, what is the product and how can you connect with the customers? And then how does that change over time? Now, in order to do those things, of course, you're going to need some internal coordination. And therefore, you have to be able to help, everyone has to help each other, and you also have to onboard new people in that process. Thirdly, you're going to need some service providers and vendors. So you need pieces, parts, and services. Now, it's interesting because actually, this is somebody else's this. So the services and product features of another company are the providers and vendors to your company. And then you, providing those services and features to another company, you are the provider or vendor to another company. So that means that other companies are also trying to anticipate your needs and are also delivering marketing campaigns, and they have sales processes, they have communication channels, and they're trying to be relevant in the market. So, they have their R&D, they have sales and marketing, and then they have their product features department, they have their, these things. So these two questions are very interesting because they are a mirror image of each other. And then in the middle, you have people who are working with the people who are inputting into the company. They're managing the inputs process, and then there's other people who are managing the outputs process. And of course, there's also more of a generic thing, so improving some element of this business relationship in order to reach this outcome. This is just a general statement of what these things are talking about. Now, of course, we can always jump into Google has that book, The Business Model Generation. And they have their business model canvas. All right, so in this section, what we're talking about, here's the customer relations, current and new customers, and here's the value proposition, the sales and marketing, and research and development. Well, the sales and marketing is on this side. So we have the channels, and we have the customer segments. This is how you will find out the customer needs. This is how you'll communicate the features and benefits of your services and products. And this is how you will, get those new customers, upsell, or continue to sell to your current customers. On this side, this is where you're dealing with those providers. And also, this is where you are working with your colleagues in order to take those inputs and then output into a value proposition. All right, so all of that, you can see all of that within this table. Now, the benefit of this is we can talk about now, current responsibilities, change over time, and we can talk about long-term goals. All right, so that's why it's expanding, ing, improving, expanding, improving, because we want to grow, develop, and we want to be ahead of the customers so that when they call, the product or service is ready for delivery. Now, so this is where, so we don't have this context. Here's context. So we're trying to build context. And the first part of building context is deciding, what are we talking about? Are we talking about some subject within our operations? Are we talking about some relationship with our provider or vendor? Or are we talking about the sales, marketing, research, development, or something to do with our customers? Now, once you've made those decisions, then of course we're going to jump into the state progress checklist. Now, as you can see, here's the here's the create effect. It's right here. Here's the form agendas in the middle, and then here is shape potential at the bottom. And that gets broken out, that gets expanded into these 9 different steps. All right, so really the endeavor elements are 3, And then the typical activities, how do you express those endeavor elements? There are 9. Now, what I've noticed as I've worked with students is that when they're talking about this state synergies checklist, they're generally going to see, I even put it on the same piece of paper, because there's going to be there's generally people, they can immediately talk about the reuses, the outcomes, and what kind of actions can be taken. Now, once you've identified the long-term goals and the goals in general and the reuses and some of the general actions that need to be taken, then we pass it on to the next level. So forming agendas and shaping potential. If we go back, all right, so then it goes down to the department level. So the C levels, they call their department heads and they say, hey, okay guys, how do we make this possible? Now, as soon as you're talking about how are we going to make this possible, then we're talking about teamwork. All right, so teamwork includes, so it's easiest to talk about so specifically, which customers are we talking about? Specifically, which colleagues or stakeholders are we talking about? Which providers or vendors are we talking about? Who's actually in the deal? Right? So there it is. This is the deal level, contracts level. And so we got to find out who is in the room. And that's why we jump into the teamwork. All right, so immediately, but we're also, in this case, we're also still talking about outcomes, reuses, actions, and then also, the actions that they take, it's how do they support each other? And then actions like other actions. So this is interesting because in the past, when we were talking about Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, then we said that begin with the end in mind. Tom has broken that open into 2 different types of end in mind. So the direct results of the project and also the reuses of the project, what will go back into the bottom here, into the resources regarding potential. Now, in this case, this checklist here, it has 2 forms of action. All right, so you can see that suddenly the taking action is also increased. So we're not just talking about basic action for customers. What we're also talking about, how do these different entities support each other? All right, and then that support then gets funneled down into personas. So for example, in their company, what other individuals are going to be part of this process, and then what's the work that those individuals do. All right, now at this point, the developmental level also needs to look at inventiveness. All right, so I'm not going to go through the whole of inventiveness, but let's just focus on a couple of ideas. Now, suddenly reuses, it gets a different meaning. So in other areas, when we talked about reuses, in general, we were talking about reusing what? So there's a little star here, and we go down here, and reuses often include resources and entities. All right, so here we're talking about reusing skills, reusing data, reusing entities, reputations, loyalties, funds, infrastructure, and time. And entities that we can reuse include customers, colleagues, competitors, providers, others, and these entities may change over time. So those are resources, right? So here it is, resources. And then also the entities, it's interactions. And then motivation is what gets these interactions to, work with each other, and within the context of using their resources and also taking advantage of available resources in order to move forward. All right, so you can see that the next level of what we're talking about, we go down to shaping potential, because we need to know, what do we have? What are we going to use in order to create these agendas? Now, like I was saying, it suddenly reuses the typical activities imitate. Now, imitate, it could be like, how did we do it in the past? How do other companies do it? So what are we talking about? So innovation, it means that as we start to think about this business relationship, these different entities who will be involved in these contracts, we also want to start to form some of our assumptions. We want to start to pull in some data. We want to start to think about how to create some insight. And the inventiveness checklist asks us to look around, look outside of the organization, look outside of our current contract, look outside of our current team, and how are other groups doing the same thing. Now, the next one, Synergies, it asks us to now look at how are we doing things? How are we supporting each other? What are the actions that we're taking? All right? So these imitate and integrate, it's going right directly into these ideas of actions, these two different types of actions, which can be seen again in the state synergies checklist right here. All right, so what kind of actions are we going to be taking to support each other, and what other actions are we taking? Okay, but now, like specifically, well, what do you mean actions? Well, okay, so actions, for example, we need to start to make assumptions about what's going to happen in this project. So let's look at some outside of the organization, start to think about imitating some of the best practices, and also figure out, well, like, how can we integrate even better? Now, this idea of integration, obviously, now we're talking about improving coordination. How do we improve our coordination with external stakeholders, internal stakeholders, providers, different teams within the organization, like who's going to be involved on this team, and then how can we better integrate with them? Now, also, we're going to need to think about what? So new ideas, so coming up with concepts. So just in general, like how do we come up with new ideas? Also, what are some things that we shouldn't be doing? And then what happens when when other companies are going to be doing these things? Can we slow the process of other companies? What can we do to interfere with what's going on within the market? All right, so this whole process of what we've just talked about really sets the stage for exactly who are we talking about, what's the topic that we're talking about, what's the goal that we're trying to achieve, what are the interactions that we have, what are the resources that we have, what's the motivation, specifically who's going to be involved, and then what's going on within the market in general, what kind of ideas do we have, and also how do we get a closer, tighter relationship, better coordination. So this is like, if we go back into the business model canvas, now we're talking about key activities, we're talking about key resources, we're talking about key partners, getting everybody tightly, getting us closer and closer to figure out what the heck is going on and how can we achieve those goals. All right, now from there, that's where this course that I'm trying to talk about, where I'm trying to create, is born. So the assumptions that we already have are related to like the team, right? Like who's on the team, and like we already have a couple of topics with inventiveness about what exactly is going to happen with this endeavor. Now, within that context, that was before the context, and this is before the metadata. So this is all the stuff that has to be ready to go even before this course starts. So it's just like, now on the other hand, you can also use these two checklists to amplify, to magnify these other ideas that come later. So it's it's multi-directional. And that's actually kind of like a challenge here, is because there's so much flexibility. And then at the same time, it's a challenge because the C-levels and the departments have created these objectives, and they have their own key results. Now, the key result, it falls into the decision level, right? So the key result from the departmental level, it becomes the objective for the decision-making level. So these guys now, they get their analysts together and they start to crunch the data. But that's the thing, is like, crunch the data for what? Analyze the past of what? Decide for the future of what? Like the objective or the key results and objectives are already set at these levels. And now these guys have to create their own key results. They have to create their own objectives. They have to understand the project goals. And then they have to create their own goals. So that's why it's like I'm still, I'm just talking my way through these things over and over and over again. And right now, I'm, in general, if we go and look at my endeavor, we did this week, next week. Now we can remember that the overall process. So what is the overall process of the course? Help people facilitate a process as a coach. All right. So show a process that managers can follow to coach people using 2 checklists as brainstorming tools. But this is such a big challenge because there's those other 4 areas that have to be resolved before we can delve into this, use these other 2 checklists. And so what am I supposed to do? Am I supposed to teach all 4 of those other boxes first? Those other 4 areas first? And then, or I just take a very specific example where it's already, the general objective, or I should say the context, is already created. And I think that's where we go, is that we have to just... So now in this checklist, I put state assumptions comes first, but that's actually not really true. So it says, but selecting the endeavor comes before state assumptions. All right, so framing the context. Before we can frame the context, we have to select the endeavor. And then after we've selected the endeavor, then we can go into the assumptions checklist, start to do the research, start to develop some insight, start to look at some assumptions, and then from there, we can go back, we can complete the context. So it's like because the endeavor actually goes up here. We have to write the endeavor first, and then after we have the endeavor, then we can frame the context. But like I said, context will come from the research that you do through the state assumptions checklist. And then once you have that research completed, then you'll be able to develop those scenarios, and you'll be able to clearly identify the similarities and differences, and then also you can start to put together some metrics. So that's the crash course about like how this thing actually comes together. How these 6 different levels, these 3 levels with these 6 different checklists, how they all come together in less than 25 minutes. Now, of course, then we have the results level, which we're not going to talk about today because we're still focusing on how to create this course. So, make decisions and create actionable items. So there's going to be a checklist level process, framework of themes and typical activities. So that's what I'm going to talk about, like what the checklists look like. And then I'll have one-pagers, so then I'll help people to use the one-pagers so that they can work with customers that they coach. And then I need to dramatize the process using examples. So really what we're doing here is we need the examples. Now we're not talking about going through the online course. So I think we do need to continue to develop one-pagers. That's very important. And then we're talking about case studies. So I'm still going through the case studies. I'm still going through the state impact examples. And I haven't started sharing examples in the teaching process yet. And then finally, here it is. which case studies can be good examples for department level processes and decision level. All right, so decide on, let's say, 5 endeavors from case studies to use within the course. All right, so that's the part where I'm really focused on right now, is trying to get to this point. Because like I said, like what we just talked about in the last 25 minutes, is we really need to have a specific example. Now the thing is that I don't really want to go like through the way I went through all these 4 checklists already. I don't actually want to do that. I want these 4 checklists just to be like a memo. Like this case study, these case studies just need to be 5 pages, just 1 page each, which just basically says, well, you know, this company A, it wants to work on, and then of course, so I'm going to need an example for like this, one for this, one for this, one for this, one for this, and then some combination. And then once I have those 5 examples decided, then of course I will identify, you know, how those people, who's involved in the deal. Then we're going to talk about some element of innovation, and then and of course there's going to be the actual endeavor. And then from there, boom. So then we start. So then the data analyst, he or she receives this endeavor, and then they have to put together a research assignment in order to develop the context and scenarios and metrics for making the decision. So there you go. That's the whole thing that I'm trying to do right now. And now that I've, more of a personal level, I tore a bunch of cement out of my bathroom wall, and I feel like I've hit ground zero in my apartment here. I have moved into my new apartment recently, and I'm starting the renovation process. I've cleaned the floor, cleaned all the, I had dust, I had cement all over the place, cement dust. I purchased a lot of the pieces for the shower unit. I got lots of tools. The kitchen is starting to look better. I got my food storage. I got my bedroom, the basics of the bedroom set up. I have my desk for work and also my spiritual study. I have my exercise routine. I got everything back set up. And so the transition period, the difficult when you're uprooting yourself. I've been uprooting myself constantly, for 20 years. So, well, I guess it's been 23 years now. So it's been a little bit of a challenge the last couple of days because, those case studies, it's actually quite a big challenge and an energy-intensive challenge. And if we talk about my work styles, as I'm doing this, it's really like when I added new things to the this week, next week checklist, that's like this thing where you're just starting out new. And so when you're starting to do those things, there's a lot of energy that you have to spend when you're using a haphazard style of work. But now that I'm getting settled in, then I'll be able to have some A/B testing for work processes, eventually have some procedures, and then hopefully at some point start to incorporate some automation, maybe find some help. And because in general, I would say that I have relatively, I would say, well, technically I have a relatively low level of success. Now, it's not that my ability is too low. I think maybe there's some problem with competency because, I've spent 8 years studying this work and it still takes more understanding. Certainly achievement is not very high right now. So I'm working on increasing my levels of success, levels of effort. Of course, I'm doing this challenge, 9-week challenge. It's within a challenge within a challenge, my 12-week challenge. Today's actually day 40. of my 12-week challenge. So we have 20 days left. Basically, we're talking business days. We basically have 4 weeks left in the challenge. I'm sure we can get a lot of effort or a lot of work done. So, but the thing is, I have to put in extra effort, not just make the videos, but also get through those case studies, also get through all those examples of the state impact checklist, so that these videos that I'm making for you will have all of that information, and you can see, so we can make some progress. So certainly I can increase my level of effort, especially now as I'm now in this apartment and starting to settle down a little bit. And then, of course, as I put in that effort, I'll also be able to increase the levels of success as I more fully understand this project and then move forward. So I could analyze my current levels and then set some target levels. I'm not going to do that today, but this is why in a previous video I told you that I'm basically at the results level, because I am working on these processes. But then at the same time I'm at the decision level too, because I'm creating these online courses. Oh, I gotta go. All right, we'll talk to you later.